Madam Secretary, as we know, Social Security goes insolvent in 8 to 9 years. The president has not put out a plan. He's put out a series of talking points. He calls them general principles, but there's nothing detailed in that report. And in it, he very loudly is saying that he's going to raise taxes on those over $400,000 a year, as he said 4 years ago when he was campaigning for office the first time, but he's still not updated. Now, I'll note that there's already been $4.9 trillion in new taxes proposed for those making over $400,000 a year. It seems to be the go-to place, fill in the blank, we're going to tax those over $400,000 a year for whatever. Of that $4.9 trillion, none of that has been dedicated to Social Security. So with that context, if you are going to address the unfunded accrued liability for Social Security, what would the tax rate have to be, or what would the total amount of taxes have to be on those making over $400,000 a year?
I don't have that computation to offer you, but the president has in the past discussed the possibility of raising the ceiling on what income would be included. Of course, he would protect his pledges to protect households making under $400,000.
But let me ask, because the president theoretically has a plan, and if I'm rubbing my forehead, it's just because it seems worse than I thought. If there's not been a computation, if there's not been a calculation of what the tax rate would have to be on those making over $400,000 a year, has Treasury really not looked at, okay, we're already charging $4.9 trillion for the deficit, for Medicare, for a lot of other things, and now we got to add social, but we haven't done the math to figure out how much that tax rate would have to be?
The president doesn't have a plan. He has principles. He wants to work with Congress to find a way to protect Social Security and extend its solvency beyond 2034. Now,
if the president wishes to work with Congress, why does he continually demagogue Republicans on anything that doesn't exactly line up to what apparently suits his reelection? And if I'm frustrated, there's going to be a 23 to 25% cut for those receiving benefits now, which will double the rate of poverty among the elderly, in 8 years, and he doesn't have a plan. Madam Secretary, how could he justify not having a plan when he's been in office for 3 years already?
He believes it's important to work with Congress and not
Madam Secretary, he has not worked with us at all. On this Senate Finance Committee, we have not heard, at least I haven't, and I've been very active in this issue, we've not heard from the president one peep except to hear demagoguery rhetoric yelled at us on State of the Union addresses as regards social. So can the American people who rely upon Social Security, when can they expect the president to come to us and ask to begin to work on that plan?
Well, the president has laid out a plan for Medicare.
That's not my question. He's laid out general principles, as you said earlier, but he's certainly not come to us and said, I want to enter negotiations.
It is true that he's started with Medicare, the hospital. So then
let me ask you on that. On Medicare, there is a certain ratio of public funds supporting Medicare relative to the trust fund. And when it exceeds a certain threshold, it's called an emergency. And within 15 days, the president is supposed to submit a plan. Last year, we hit that threshold. This year, we hit it again. And I've not seen the president's plan submitted.
The president did lay out a plan for Medicare. It involves extending trust fund solvency by modestly increasing Medicare tax rates on incomes above $400,000, and then closing loopholes in existing Medicare taxes.
Did the president include the SMI in that plan? The SMI covering parts B and D? I don't think he covered B and D.
This is with respect to the hospital trust fund.
Yes, so Medicare, of course, as we know, also includes parts B and D, and the funding in the cost of those, which is almost entirely out of general fund, about 85% out of general fund, is going to exceed expenditures from the hospital trust fund. The president's plan did not include those two areas. I'm a doctor. I know how important Medicare is, and the president has not submitted a plan for that which is the fastest growing portion of the plan in order to address it. Madam Secretary, this has been a very disappointing performance by a man who wants to once more be our president for the next 4 years on two programs incredibly important to our seniors. With that, I yield.
I believe the president has laid out a plan for the hospital trust fund, and he's laid out a budget that contains $3 trillion of a deficit reduction, and that provides enough general revenues to be able to support the expenditures that are projected for Part B.
Madam Secretary, welcome. In your testimony, you repeat what OMB Director Young also said, that the president's budget reduced the deficit by $3 trillion. President Obama, in his final budget, fiscal year 2017,